21st century is going to be very different to the 20th century. 20th century was all about developing technology that was appropriate to the inputs we had in the 20th century, which was cheap fossil fuels and lots of potential for yield increases through selective breeding and the like of the major staples: wheat, rice, the things that feed about half of humanity. 21st century, we've got resource crunches for land, for water, for resources, for inputs. Things like nitrogen, phosphorus are in significant pressure. And so the type of production decisions we make are going to have to be very different. They're going to have to be sensitive to a changing climate and actually the non-food needs of rural areas, biodiversity, maintenance of clean air and water. So we're going to have to find new ways of doing agriculture. But most of the problem of hunger, food insecurity, bad diets in the world today, it's actually not about production anyway. It's about distribution, it's about access, it's about justice, it's about inequality. So we have to find ways in which the people who are at the moment the global poor are at least able to nourish themselves with diets. And if they don't have the right diets, they're going to stay poor because they're not going to have the mental capacities or the physical capacities to enter into the labour force. So it's a wicked problem, it's got many dimensions, but at the end of the day it's about doing things differently with a social justice lens. Australian farmers have a good track record in doing things cleverly. I think the problem with Australian farming since white settlement, I guess, is that we've always assumed there's lots of resources there, lots of soil to be used up, lots of water to be used up. So with things like the Murray-Darling Basin Plan, which I think was a great reform, we're putting a price on water, we're putting economic incentives on farmers to do things differently, and we're trying to retain some of the Murray-Darling Basin water for the environment, which is crucial to the whole health of the river system. So Australian farmers have to do things differently. I think we could go further still. I think we could reward farmers better for preserving biodiversity. At the moment, farmers say, I think not unjustifiably, if we farm more sustainable, it's going to cost us in yield and profit, and I think the rest of the community might have an obligation to share in some of those costs. I think that's good for sustainable Australia. It's good for climate change too. Well, business should do what business does best, which is to be competitive and efficient and respond to consumer signals. I think the bigger question is, what are those signals? I think the onus is on consumers to think about food, and I think the onus is on governments to put appropriate regulations in place and to ensure that companies abide by those regulations. In the US, probably more than Australia, for example, there's a big debate about food labelling and what an appropriate diet is, and there's a great politics of that. Big food has captured bits of Congress, and food labelling and the FDA in America, the Food and Drug Administration, is sometimes a very political beast in the pocket of big food sometimes. So I think there's a democratic onus to make sure rules are fair, and I think if the rules are fair and if we have watchdogs, NGOs and the like that are ensuring that our food is good for our diets and safe, but also produced sustainably, companies will respond. So I think that's the bottom line. So I think there's a number of ways in which we can deal with that. I think there are problems with the way that some food items are traded on derivative markets in particular. The speculation has caused price bubbles. When prices spike, governments get very fearful about the ability to feed their populations if they have to rely on imports. So they put in place trade restrictions to try and monitor trade, and that's generally not good. So there's a need, I guess, for a lot of things like that to happen in the future. I think there's lots of innovative policy actions governments can take to There's examples such as corporate social responsibility in palm oil, for example. There are round tables. There's policies with regard to the chocolate industry. A lot of this stuff is actually, it's interesting, it's both private and public. So for example, in Europe, a lot of the supermarket chains have come together in an organisation known as Global Gap, and Global Gap has guidelines for sustainable sourcing, and some of those guidelines have then ended up in European Union trade policies. So it's almost like, it's not really supermarkets designing policies for the European Union, but it's a partnership of private and public interests. And those kind of initiatives have sometimes proven very useful for sustainability, labour rights, ensuring that in the case of chocolate, for example, there's been examples in the past of chocolate being produced through slave labour in West Africa. And I think that's obviously something we want to crack down on, and a combination of private and public action is a good way of doing that. So I'm a geographer, and some people say, you're a geographer, I thought you'd be an ag economist or a nutritionist or something like that. But as a geographer, you're really interested in landscapes, human landscapes, physical landscapes. So you're interested in the way humans and the environment come together. And geographers look at that through many lenses. I tend to look at it in the way that food systems come together. And I'm particularly interested as a geographer to look at the way in which things change over space. So food inevitably gets produced in one place and gets consumed in another. And that's just not like a chain, like an engineering chain of transport logistics. It's actually a chain of power relations. So in many instances, farmers have to sell their product to other organisations that are more powerful. And so there's debates about the split of profits and the way value is apportioned between different actors in those value chains. And it also brings in questions of sustainability, debates about food miles, debates about carbon emissions through packaging and transport. So as a geographer, you're interested in the way food systems are embedded or create landscapes, human landscapes, physical landscapes, and the way that the trade of product from one place to another and the control of that trade and who has the power, how that sort of shifts those landscapes. It could be the case that powerful companies might, I'm very cautious to use this word, but might exploit farmers in some instances, and they use their market power to force farmers to engage in practices that generate short-term profits but are bad for the environment. So if you're looking at why an environment in a particular area is being despoiled, your answer mightn't be in the farm practices, or it mightn't be a technical question, it might be an economic question about power in the food chain.